The food of impressions. We live by impressions, which are the most important of all forms of sustenance that enter our human mechanism. The three food groups discussed previously, namely air, food, and impressions, give energy to our body. However, the most important of these is impressions. Then we have three gateways on our faces: the eyes, nose, and mouth. No matter what a depressed person eats with their mouth or how fresh the air that they breathe, it will not cure them until they receive a text message or email they are waiting for, that somebody loves them, or that they have their tax refund. An email, a phone call, a text message, or a letter are not air, nor are they physical food. They are a series of marks on a screen or piece of paper that convey certain meaning, which transforms our state. That is something to understand about the food of impressions. What we hear somebody say about us, how many likes or faves we receive on social media, how many followers we've gained, can depress or exalt us. When we see the number of the horse that we have backed, or the lotto numbers go up on the board, we can pass from depression to rejoicing. So, do we live chiefly in a world of impressions and depend upon them? What we hear, what we read, what we see, and what we share when engaged in social networking constitutes impressions, and what we think to ourselves inwardly. Our real life is this world of impressions, how we receive them and how we react to them. It is in this world of impressions that we have to learn to live in the right way. That very delicate world that we are continually concerned with and concerned about. A message or video can completely alter our sense of the future. Messaging is neither the food of air nor physical food like a donut, but is a totally different kind of food, which this work calls impressions. When a person smiles at you, it's an impression. It may warm your heart and your whole being, whereas when someone frowns at you, the reverse may be felt. Impressions are psychological, yet the work says they have a certain materiality, a finer materiality than the materiality of air or of pizza. Taking the question of impressions with regard to the idea that work teaches, namely, that impressions are the most important food of all. This is a commentary on the food of impressions, speaking of the class of impressions that make it possible for us to exist in our world normally. Being exposed to constant bad news, persistent negative criticism from others, negative fault-finding, all these form a class of impressions that will not give us the right force for normal life, under the ordinary conditions of life. We all remember when someone has said something pleasant to us, and we must all have noticed how sometimes a single look, a word, or a comment can make us feel so much better. In this delicate world of psychological impressions, we are like clumsy hippopotami, both to ourselves and to other people. For a great deal of the time, we try to get impressions from others that will make us content with ourselves, having no strength to work against any wrong feelings of self that are produced. For example, through flattery, by compliments, by successful moments, seeking attention, and so on. When we are in that state, our psychic life is far too delicate and not rightly based. So what is it that we crave most, mechanically speaking? We crave attention more than anything else, and this belongs to the satisfaction of vanity. That certainly gives a very powerful stimulus, so much so that if a person's psychological existence is based entirely upon vanity, then they will feel depressed if they are not popular on social and other digital media. To live by impressions of this kind is to live the life of the most powerful thing in us that is called false personality. To live a life of pure internal considering and of making accounts gives an unsatisfactory basis to our existence, as it depends entirely upon how people behave towards us, and means that we have no centre of gravity in ourselves. Strictly speaking, we do not exist, except as functions of the praise or blame of other people. Adversity at some point will hit hard, whereas success will raise us to an entirely wrong feeling of ourselves. We are then like domesticated pets that depend so much upon the praise or blame of their keepers. And if a number of people meet together having these creatures in themselves, we can be sure that they will begin to yap at one another, which is the attraction of public houses and bar counters. You will find yourself in a room filled with dogs yapping, all wishing to call attention to themselves, all jealous of one another. This is the situation of the majority of society when they gather in a so-called social environment. Unfortunately, one or two of them may have cats, tigers or bears on their laps, even snakes and owls, in which case the gathering will prove troublesome to anyone present that possesses sensitivity to the inner states of other people. We should not allow the dog, the cat, or any of our other inner animals to take in impressions and so determine our psychological existence. We should try to receive impressions more deeply than these creatures can. Those animals within that we so carefully carry about are spiritual totems. The question in work is therefore, on what do impressions fall in you? Do they fall on your wolf that always demands attention and praise, or on your tiger that pretends to be either affectionate or indifferent, on your snakes that hiss the whole time? It is for this reason that we are told in work to watch where impressions go to, on what eyes they fall, because all these animals are different eyes within us that are very undeveloped and not really fully conscious to us yet, belonging, so to speak, to the not yet conscious side of us, to that other person that we do not notice yet, owing to a pretense of ourselves, but which other people have perhaps noticed already. The objective of any self-observation is to make us more conscious to what lies within. Unfortunately, we move about in life imagining we know ourselves, failing to realize that we have another side that has to be made conscious gradually before we can begin to grow. Living simply on the surface of ourselves, we can never penetrate more deeply into the background because we are prevented from receiving influences of a finer order. Influences, in fact, that alone could begin to make us grow. It is this dark, unconscious surface of ourselves that stands between us and influences from higher centers, healing influences that come down from the side octave of the sun. Unless we realize what fools we are, we'll always imagine that we are not fools, or if, for a moment, we feel we have been careless, socially speaking, we will immediately heal the breach through a terrific discharge or exudation of self-justifying. So we once more retain that curiously inadequate idea of ourselves, which we do not see as being deficient, or indeed as nothing more than a scarecrow that we imagine represents a perfect avatar of ourselves. When impressions begin to fall on us to a deeper level, we begin to live in an entirely new world. So, if you want to live in a new world, then you must run deep, get away from the surface of yourself, and go behind the mirror, which is certainly, in a sense, painful, but extraordinarily more replete with meaning and new satisfaction. You then begin to realize what it means to say, "I am not this," and that already means a certain degree of self-remembering. Work on self teaches that we must have constant impressions in order to live. We need the impressions of all foods, of all the fruits of the earth, because we are a microcosm, firstly in the macrocosm of nature, our closest big world, the primary cosmos above us, called in work organic life. We are given the power through the organization of our senses to taste the impressions of the natural world. We are given the power of tasting butter and jam, bread and pears, apples and caviar, poultry and beef, of smelling grass and the sea. Have you ever considered why we have these powers already in us? We taste a peach or strawberry and think that the difference of taste lies in the two fruits. However, the difference really lies in our ability to taste differently. We have the apparatus ready-made in us for taking in these two different impressions of taste. Think for a moment, because people find difficulty in seeing what is meant here. Furthermore, people find it difficult to see that we are a microcosm fitted into a macrocosm and prepared for it. They find it difficult to understand that we are related to the entire cosmos in general through our construction. They find it difficult to see that we are born in a universe to which we can respond, and which responds to us if we can but find the right request to make. One reason is because people take themselves as being completely isolated, not seeing that they are constructed to live in a universe and therefore must be a part of that universe, and so in some way correspondent to it. We have eyes that respond to the vibrations of light, ears that respond to the vibrations of air. Hence, we are constructed to take in impressions. Confining ourselves briefly to the first cosmos that we live in, organic life, the earth, without which we could not exist, supplies us with food, air, and water, along with certain impressions. We are speaking here of taste derived from the products of nature. All these are necessary for us because we are born with the required apparatus, which is an extraordinarily fine apparatus designed for the function of taste, smell, touch, and sight, for appreciating what the earth offers. And this apparatus should be satisfied reasonably with the fresh produce so important for health. Those impressions that fall directly upon our instinctive center. We have in us the powers for tasting and smelling different things created naturally, and so producing different impressions. Since we already have these powers, such as the power of distinguishing between the rich taste of strawberry and the equally rich taste of a raspberry, one side of our life of impressions must be satisfied by the products of nature, as we are born with the necessary receptors for these different objects. This belongs to the general argument of work, that we have more in us than we actually use. For that reason, we see all scientific attempts to make synthetic foods, powders, and so on as yielding no right impressions of taste, because they are entirely false and not at all scientific. Since we are constructed to live first in organic life on Earth as small living cells in some vast organism, we require natural sustenance and not some substitute for it. This constitutes our first instinctive life of impressions. Food is an impression primarily, then a substance or physical food secondly. The impression gives appetite, but the food substance itself provides nourishment. To try to replace synthetically a food substance without the impression of taste and the pleasure that results from it is to ignore that most important food of impressions. Why does nature provide so many interesting tastes and smells in food? Why do people become physically tired when they receive bland or tasteless food for a long time? What is the difference between an appetizing and unappetizing meal with regard to exciting the right activities of instinctive center, the work of digestion, and so on? Let's look for answers in what the work calls the supreme food of impressions. Suppose we are governed by tastes. We have heard in previous commentaries about inner taste, which can discriminate between good psychological food and bad psychological food, just as our physical taste can with regard to literal food. The supreme physical impression that we give our entire mechanism is that of self-remembering, the finest taste of all tastes possible, the taste of something akin to real I. The work says that a moment of self-remembering supplies every cell in our body with food of a kind that it does not ordinarily get. It notes that when we remember ourselves, we give a shock to the whole mechanism. Every cell receives force and new energy, a new sustenance. This is called the first conscious shock, where all our work lies for many years. This is what we forget to give ourselves, although we have heard it 101 times. Instead of remembering ourselves, we insist upon arguing or of thinking about everything, even thinking about what self-remembering means. We have been advised that if we do not know what self-remembering means, then we should try to stop our thoughts, even if it's only for a few seconds, to stop the bus for a short while, and to become nothing, no one, nobody, and nowhere. If we are able to do this, then we'll notice that we feel quite different, as if someone had turned on a light. If you perhaps feel this image is too literal, then try to recall what it's like to suddenly notice where you are, to come to your senses, or, as someone once said, as if I suddenly took my head out of the water. When we experience something like this, we suddenly notice the room we are in, or the window seems to transmit more light. We hear sounds more clearly from far away. We can read the paper without our glasses. This means that the cells of our body have been revitalized in some way, have been stimulated. They have received new food that springs out of that act of self-remembering. Our self-hypnosis, our continued identification with quite useless chains of thought, our powerful preoccupations which we think so important, and which of course never lead anywhere, our continual internal considering, account-making, and the entire mess of our negative emotions make it very difficult for anyone eventually to attempt self-remembering. In the strain of life, we never remember ourselves. As to do so, one must have some force, coming not from life but from a different direction, to enable them to make the attempt. We have to step out of ourselves, out of the train or bus of mechanical life, and literally snap out of it in order to do so. We have to step out of the finely interwoven and usually unpleasant pattern that we insist upon thinking is life. However, we find no reason why we should do so, and perhaps have no idea what it means to step out of the stream of daily life for a moment, even to try to expose ourselves to influences that come from an entirely different direction. Consider what this means, to nourish your machine by the wrong feeling of I, as everyone does. We are told that if we could attain the right feeling of I through self-remembering, then every cell in our body would have new life. In contrast, therefore, this implies that when we identify with the wrong feeling of ourselves, we will be giving wrong force, the wrong energy to the cells of our entire body. If we are entirely negative and evil-minded, then we feel ourselves through those emotions into which we put the feeling of I, so that we give our body extremely toxic sustenance from this highest source of food, which is a product of our psychological state. From impressions coming from different eyes that we are identified with, and not simply through impressions coming from the senses, which have their own importance and value, but on another scale. P.D. Ouspensky would point out that we all have eyes that can make us ill when we identify with them, and so fall under their power. It may be necessary, however, to meet these eyes and to struggle with them eventually, because sooner or later we have to fight everything in us that is against work and the harmony it seeks to create within. By the process of perception and inner separation, by seeing what is true and what is not true, what has goodwill and what has ill intentions toward this work. Impressions coming through our senses are the first spoken of, and then impressions coming from a feeling of I. The highest of impressions is a feeling of real I, which does not come from outside, but is an impression from within us. At the same time, all external impressions entering change in their intensity according to what eye you are in to receive them. If you are in some state of self-remembering, then external impressions would be intensely beautiful, whereas if you are in negative eyes, then that incredible meal or the most beautiful day means absolutely nothing to you. When a thing means nothing to you, you get no impressions from it. The more a thing means to you, the more impressions you get from it, and vice versa. All this is a question of lengthy observation and an interchange of views. Everyone should ask themselves, on what food of impressions do you nourish yourself? If you are negative internally as a rule, then you will take in unpleasant impressions and so feed yourself on them. If you are depressed, then you will take in only depressing things from your surroundings. This will infect the whole of your human mechanism. If you are fearful, nervous, and irritable, then you will take on impressions accordingly. From the stream of our inner life, we can usually harvest very small inner impressions, or, as it were, stale impressions. However, if you make an effort, you decrease entropy and take in fresh impressions. Ask yourself what this degradation means to you. It means a state where everything becomes equalized and there is no interchange of energy. Then so everything eventually becomes stale and you complain about life being boring. When you make an effort, you go against your staleness. When you deny yourself something, you increase its attraction, and then that collapse is diminished. The idea of self-remembering is to decrease decay significantly through having a distinct sense between yourself and external life. All identifying increases fragmentation, it runs you down, draining gumption, till there is no difference between you and life. If you are able to see life as an illusion in the right way, as yoga systems teach, then you will feel an increasingly powerful difference of potential between you and life, which will stop your life from falling apart. But if you are immersed in life, then everything, no matter what it is, will come into an equilibrium, and you will cease to take in impressions beyond the minimum necessary.